she took her firstborn from her. And secondly, had a meeting with her 3 or 4 days after she came out of hospital and told her if she ever saw her again, she would put her into a mother and baby home. My name is Margaret Norton. I was born on the 28th of March 1972. I'm 48 years old and I was illegally adopted. My adoptive parents were always very special to me because I was never treated any differently. They were amazing parents. They would have encouraged me to do anything, that I wanted to do, whether it was to make the mistake and fall flat on your face, or whether to do something and achieve it. They would have always been there and, ready to back me up or prop me up, whatever I needed at the time.
It wasn't until her 20s that Margaret began to look for her birth family, and that was only because she found her illegal birth certificate, which raised more questions than answers.
So when we started looking first, we started in 2011, 2012. My adopted mother at the time had Alzheimer's, so she couldn't help me. My adopted dad, I know now why he was sort of loath to give me any real information, but so I wasn't getting any, help there either. We initially set up a bogus phone line. I had a mobile phone going and we had put a number of flyers up in different places in Carrickmacross. I did all the local newspapers. We did the national newspapers. As you know, you covered a story for me and we got massive response from that, but that mobile that we had set aside was going night and day. We had people whispering down the phone who thought that they were coming with some information, and they were trying to help. Like, the people at Carrickmacross were fantastic because they did want to help. They knew that what had happened was something very wrong. They knew of this doctor, they knew what she was doing, and they were trying to help, but they couldn't, through no fault of their own.
At the beginning of her search, Margaret had no idea it would last so long.
This went on for 11 years. The stress was horrendous at times. I remember one morning getting up and not being able to stand upright. And I phoned my husband and I said, I just can't even move. I had pains everywhere. And it was all stress. It was just because every door that you knocked on was closed tight, because people couldn't help. They hadn't got the information. We know that now, that they didn't have the information to help. And it was terrible.
But no matter how torturous it got, Margaret was not prepared to give up her search.
I had to know at that point who my birth mother was, because I had had children of my own at that stage. And I know the huge importance that motherhood is. And I knew that even though she had given me up, she had carried me for 9 months, it had to mean something. It was so important to me to know, to give her an opportunity if she wanted to take it, to hear me say that it was okay, that there was no animosity there, I wasn't cross with her.
Margaret had been illegally adopted by a high-profile GP called Dr. Irene Creedon, who was operating out of Carrickmacross. By doing this, she had allowed her adoptive parents to sign her birth certificate, and this meant it wiped her entire origins.
I was cross with Dr. Irene Creedon because of what she did to me, to my life. That 11 years, on the outside, we all look fine, but it had to take from me being a mother. It had to take from me being a wife. I know it took from me personally because, like I said, I had days where I couldn't move because the pains in my body were so bad through stress. And that's all it could have been, because I was so frustrated, getting phone calls from people who I know they were ringing me out of the goodness of their heart and trying to solve this for me. But I know now that we could be still taking those phone calls and we would have had there would have been no result at the end of them.
Margaret wanted to give up her search so many times because of the stress she was under trying to piece together her life after it had been so cruelly taken from her.
Oh, lots of times. Look, I have a bag full of stuff, and there was lots of times where I put the bag into the press and said, that is it, I can't do this anymore. But I had a huge support. My family were a huge support to me. You yourself were a huge support, and always, when you rang, you would say, look, let's just try this. And I knew deep down I wanted it. I think I was just afraid, because I was afraid that we would meet the end of the road if I kept going and that there was nowhere else to go. And I was afraid of that happening.
But through sheer grit and determination and telling her story nationally, Margaret didn't give up and was able to piece her life together.
I now know that I was born in the Louth Hospital to a single mother on the 28th of March 1972. It is information that conflicts with my birth certificate, which told me I was born in a doctor's surgery in Carrickmacross. The name of the doctor was Dr. Irene Creedon, which is incorrect.
Dr. Irene Creedon knew what she was doing was completely illegal.
It meant that the birth certificate was invalid because your birth parents should be on that. And I knew that the people listed on it were not my birth parents. So it raised a number of questions, which again, they weren't being answered fully at home. So I then decided to do a little bit of digging myself. So with the help of my husband, we started off in Carrickmacross and started at the doctor's surgery, which is not a surgery now. She was long since retired and has since died. But we started there to see, could we get any information? Look, at lots of people in Carrickmacross did want to help and thought that they could help. And we were very naive starting off because we thought, because we had this information on paper, that we would be able to find something out almost immediately, only to realise that, apart from the fact that I was female, nearly everything on the birth cert was false. And quite apart from the emotional side of being adopted and wondering about your birth parents and all that side of it, I then realised that my driver's licence, my marriage cert, my passport, it's all based, and still is to this day, all based on false documentation. And, actually my driver's licence is due for renewal now on the 1st of December. And you'd almost like to run the test. Could you do it with your new birth cert? What would they say? But, it's very upsetting that nothing on that cert was correct.
The fact that there was no official court order for Margaret's adoption meant that her paperwork just didn't exist.
We could get nothing. We thought that because we knew who the doctor was, because we knew where her surgery was, we knew where her records had gone, and we just thought that this was just going to be a very short process to find out, only to realise that no matter what door we knocked on, it was firmly shut, that the doctor had left it in such a way that we were never going to find out who my birth parents were off that information that we had.
But then there was a breakthrough.
The breakthrough was the DNA. This was Last Chance Saloon. This caused a major upheaval in my house because my husband said to me, why don't you just do the DNA? And I lost it altogether because I knew if I did DNA and I got nothing, there was nowhere else to go. Whilst we were doing all the other stuff, there was always a possibility that something might come up. But I knew that if I did the DNA and got nothing, that was it. So there was a lot of tears, surrounding that particular time. I did do the DNA, and when the DNA came back, it had matched me to my first cousin, who I didn't know. So not from my adopted side. This was a first cousin that I didn't know. It goes down through the science behind it and how likely or how highly you're matched to this person. And like the numbers were huge. So I knew that this was a definite match.
The waiting game was the most difficult part for Mags.
We were due to go on holidays when I got the results, and Bob had said to me, maybe leave that till we come back. But sure, look, I was on holidays 3 days, and I said to him, I'm going to email her. There is an option on Ancestry DNA to email somebody from there. So I did email her, and I just said that we had been matched on the Ancestry DNA. I didn't know what the relationship or how we could be first cousins. What I asked her, what was her mum's name and her dad's name. And she came back, and now without telling her what I was doing, and she came back and she gave me all that information, and she said, does this help you out? And I said, no, it didn't really. So then I had a sort of a bout of consciousness, and I said to Bob, I'm going to have to tell her what I'm trying to do. So I did tell her, and she phoned me on a Thursday night when we were away on holidays, and we spoke, I suppose, for about 45 minutes. And she felt that the match was probably on her dad's side. So all of a sudden I've gone from however many million people to 6 or 7, and in a small area. It was like winning the lotto. I had a surname at the time, so when we came back from holidays, as you know, myself and Bob and yourself went to births, deaths and marriages, and after 15 or 20 minutes I had my own birth cert. It was the first time in my whole life that I knew who I really was. I think I was I think I was a bit in shock, because this was at the end of 11 years, and having no joy all the way down through those years. And like, I remember being in there that day and saying to you, are you sure this is me? Because you're waiting for the next kick in the head every time. But it was me. So we had often thought down through the years that maybe there was a change of date of birth, because often they did that, but the date of birth was correct. And the biggest shock that day was seeing that I was actually born in the Louth Hospital, and that I wasn't born in Dr. Creedon surgery at all. And I remember when we were sitting at lunch that day and saying, why would she implicate herself like that by putting her address down? Like, if she had put the Louth Hospital, we might never have known that she was involved. So I often wondered why she implicated herself by putting her own surgery address down.
In the past, Dr. Irene Creedon's daughter told me her mother was a hero, and she did these things in order to help vulnerable people. But it's an argument Margaret Norton does not accept. After all, she was badly affected by the actions of Dr. Irene Creedon, who did this to many people, and it was Margaret who almost lost her own identity.
I just think that she probably didn't really care what anybody thought. I think that she was such a harsh woman that she didn't really care. She thought, it doesn't matter, I'll get away with it. And she did get away with it. That's the unfortunate part. I think this is very important, because this was 20 years after the Act came in to stop baby trafficking, to stop children, trafficking of children. 20 years. But she just didn't care. She was above the law. And I know she was above the law because I spoke to lots of people in Carrickmacross who wouldn't dare cross her. Her own daughter tried to tell us that she was doing this for the good of the women, the good of the mothers.
How do you feel about that now?
I think I struggle with the fact that she was a woman doing this to women and doing this to babies. because she was a mother herself. And I cannot just get my head around the fact that she would do this and thought it was okay to do it, because I wasn't the only one that she did it to. Like, there was lots of babies. So I do struggle with that and wonder, how could you be, like, I mean, evil is the only word. To do this to people. You know, this is not like, you know, I don't even know what you could compare it to. Like, it's so huge. It's so massive. There is no comparison. You know, it's stealing people's identities, stealing people's babies and selling them on. And I was one of those babies. She trafficked me, albeit in the one county nearly, but she trafficked me from one spot to the other.
When she started her journey, all Margaret had was a fake birth cert.
No, there is no record of me. Well, there was no record of me at the time, because we didn't know who we were looking for at the time. Like, you know, I was Margaret Brown initially, I'm Margaret Norton now, but there was nobody else. And we did hit brick walls lots of times.
While it's a very painful journey for those who were legally adopted in Ireland, it's virtually impossible to find out who you are when you're illegally adopted in Ireland.
Oh, look, you tried to, at the time I wasn't working, so I was trying to do a lot of this stuff during the day. I was trying to take calls during the day, but, you know, invariably people would ring you when they would come from work in the evening time, you know, and you didn't want to miss any call. You know, Bob and I spent a lot of time on the road, tipping up and down to Carrickmacross, just in case. Like, we were in graveyards, looking at people's headstones, trying to figure out different dates. People would give us little snippets of information, and I mean, it would totally consumed our lives for a long time. And it made things very difficult. But like I said, my kids were great, my husband was great, and I had great friends who would have supported me. If I was still going now, they would have supported me even still. Look, the government can dress this up any way they like. They can word it any way they like. What happened to me, and lots of people like me, was child trafficking. There is no nice way of saying this. That was what happened. Because I was passed through the window of a car in a hotel car park. Now, you can say it any way you like, but that's what happened. Child trafficking.
If there's anyone to blame, Margaret blames Dr. Irene Creedon.
I would say that my adoptive parents were told, we do it this way or it doesn't happen at all. And they weren't prepared to give up that opportunity of getting a baby. So I don't blame them for doing it the way they did it either, because I'm sure it was just set out to them. I know from speaking to people who knew Dr. Irene Creedon that it was either her way or no way. They were desperate for a child, and had they to do it all over again, they probably would have. And I think the only way that you would understand that is if you couldn't have a baby yourself. I think you'd do anything. So I don't think they would have done it any differently. I would think that they were probably being led by what the doctor said, and she probably said to them, this will be fine, this will be all okay, and they believed her.
Dr. Irene Creedon had made it difficult for everyone involved.
My adopted mother had gone back to Dr. Creedon to ask her, was there any information that she would have to give me later on if I'd ever asked. And Dr. Creedon absolutely ran her from the door and told her that that wasn't part of the deal. So I was, like, that's what I was a deal. I wasn't probably even, in her eyes, I was more of a commodity than a baby, because you couldn't possibly, as a woman, as a lady doctor, how could you possibly treat mothers and babies like this?
Margaret is one of the lucky ones, because 2 years ago she did trace her family, they did welcome her, and she did find out that her parents had got married and she had a full brother and sister.
I met these people, and yes, they're my blood, parents, my birth parents, but they were strangers, and me to them. So they didn't know my little ways, and I didn't know their little ways. And then, you know, like I came with baggage, like they all of a sudden had 2 grown-up grandchildren. You know, my brother's kids are very young. So, you know, I suppose they're still learning how to deal with, you know, I have a teenager and one in his 20s. You know, we're all adults. So, you know, that we're learning all the time. And of course, for the first, and you know, I laughed because my sister does say, you know, this is real life now. Like for the first 6 months, everybody's on their best behaviour, and you show up and the hair is done and makeup is done. Whereas now it's very, you know, take me as I am. You know, and we talk about things, and I suppose we're always, because it's such a short time, we're always going to learn new things about each other. I don't know, could I have gone the rest of my life not knowing? Like it was so important to me as a mother to know that my mother was out there. And I don't think, yes, I would have thrown the bag in the corner many's a time, but I don't think I would have ever given up looking until I found them.
And finding her family has helped her find peace.
Oh my God, it was like the whole package. You know, when my dad said to me, you know, we have another boy and a girl. And I think even he might have been a little bit, oh God, am I going to get into trouble now for saying this? But look, I can only say it's been fantastic. You know, we all get on really well. I can certainly see similarities in even the way we do things. You know, and my sister probably is a little bit quieter than my brother and I were a bit, you know, shoot from the hip, whereas she's a little bit more guarded, but that's not a fault. That's just the way she is. Whereas, you know, we'd be speak first and think later kind of people. But like, it's fantastic. You know, it definitely has lifted a weight off my shoulders. You know, and I don't think I could have gone through the rest of my life not knowing. Because one of my biggest fears was that if I did find her, what if she had Alzheimer's too? You know, or what if she was dead? People would have always said to me, what if you find them and they don't want to know? So I had talked to myself about that many's a time. And that was why I sent the card. And I sent it registered post, so that if they got it, I knew that they had received it, and it was up to them, or up to her, we thought at the time, to make her own move on that.
But by highlighting her story, it meant that others in Margaret's situation also came forward.
We did an interview with Keelan Chanley on her morning show. Beautiful girl. She was very emotional that time because she couldn't believe that this was happening. By the time we left the studio that morning, 18 people had phoned between the 2 phones to say that they were also commodities of Dr. Creedon. And we do know of 4 others. So you're talking about 22, and me is 23, and plus.
Margaret has also learned that Dr. Irene Creedon was connected to several institutions around the country.
Well, she definitely had a connection to Bessborough. She definitely had a connection to Sorrento in Dublin. She definitely had a connection to the Louth Hospital, because that's where I was born. So obviously there was somebody there saying, baby girl, here, ready for lifting. We know that she had a connection to St. Patrick Guild, because we know of another man who has found his mother, but sadly they wouldn't give that information until after his mother died, and St. Rita's.
Margaret doesn't believe that Dr. Irene Creedon would be held accountable today, even in the middle of a mother and baby home investigation.
I struggle to think that anything would happen to her, because I just think, you know, there's so much going on, like the tune babies, all that sort of thing. You know, there is families being left in limbo and being promised year after year after year that things will be done to make this right. I don't know that anything would happen to her. And that's what irks me. She treated my birth mother appalling.
What did she do to you?
She, well, first of all, she took her firstborn from her. And secondly, had a meeting with her 3 or 4 days after she came out of hospital and told her if she ever saw her again, she would put her into a mother and baby home. My mother was, you know, her only aftercare was antidepressants, which she has been dependent on her whole life.
But the journey to meet her family has been a very tough one, but one Margaret is delighted she took.
So after we got the birth cert, we did a lot of Googling and a lot of, you know, looking into different people. We had narrowed it down very quickly, and we didn't really know what to do. We were never going to approach this woman who had had this traumatic time in her life. I knew at this stage that she was married and she had a family of her own. So I wasn't about to, you know, step in there and maybe, you know, upend all of that. So I wrote a card, and it was a very basic card. I just said that I thought maybe that I was related to this family, and could she help me out? And I left my address and my phone number on it. Posted it on a Monday. It was delivered on a Tuesday, and I received a phone call from a gentleman on the Wednesday. I had a missed call, and when I got back into the car, I rang, and I just said that I'd had a missed call from this number, and he said to me, "Do you know who this is?" And I said, "No." And he said, "This is your dad." So, you know, it was a very difficult day, because like there was such a sense of relief, I suppose, in the one part that I'd found somebody of my own, because up to that, the only blood relatives I had were my own 2 kids. You know, and I didn't know who I looked like or who they looked like. And like it was quite surreal, because I kind of felt, you know, that was such a brave thing for him to do, because most men would have run 100 miles from having to deal with this. So we talked that day, and, you know, I asked all those, you know, kind of silly questions about the colour of people's hair and the colour of people's eyes, and, you know, where did I get this colour eyes? And we spoke about, he then told me that, you know, I had a full brother and sister because my mum and dad had stayed together and got married. So I had full siblings as well. So that was a bit, you know, mind-blowing. Obviously I'm the oldest, and then my sister comes next, and then we have a brother. And the funny thing about it was, when I was growing up, I would have always liked the idea of having a brother. I don't know what it was, but now I had my very own brother. You know, my mother and I have spoken, like they have tried to be as honest as they can. She has talked about the day that she gave me up. Well, that she gave birth to me, you know, and she was in the hospital for a few days. And like, you know, I'm not saying that she is suppressing that day, but I wouldn't blame her if she did. Like, she had to ask to see me before she left the hospital, and they wouldn't let her pick me up or anything. Like, the trauma that would cause for you for the rest of your days. I suppose my dad wasn't as au fait about what happened on the day, because like back then men didn't really take part in that day anyway. And certainly wouldn't have been, in the room when you were delivered or anything like that. So I think they try to be as honest as they can with the bit of information that they can. But they were young, and I think to a certain extent a lot of it was taken out of their hands, and it was just something that was going to be done, and that was it, and we don't speak about it. I just think what's happening now is probably nearly worse than what happened to the women back then, because the people that are in power now can do something to try and make this right, but for some reason won't. Like I spoke to my own TDs here. We have a TD and we have a senator, and both of them blamed somebody else.
And because of what's happened to thousands of women and children in this country, Margaret has little faith in the government.
I don't think they understand. I don't necessarily think, like, I spoke to two of them. I spoke to one last Monday and I spoke to one last Friday week. And both of them sat there and just nodded as I was speaking. On both occasions they told me that what had happened in the last 10 days was dealt with very badly. Like, it's just a cop-out. There is nobody saying, I am going to put this right. And we know that the government don't. During my search, I met with Frances Fitzgerald, which was a complete waste of time. Like, a trip to Dublin, it was grand, but we certainly got nothing from her. I also have a letter from Catherine Sapone saying that my letter is receiving attention. Still, nothing. I have numerous letters from the Adoption Authority of Ireland telling me the same thing in different words from 2011 to 2018. TUSLA put out a request in the summer of 2018 for illegally adopted children to come forward, that they were going to fix it all for us. I phoned them. I was told on the phone that day that they were aware of Dr. Creedon's activities, they would log my call, but that it was unlikely that somebody would come back to me. Nor did they, ever.
And she has this message for the government.
Step up. Make this right. I think actually what they're really waiting for is for these women to die so that they don't have to explain anything to anybody. Like, it's absolutely outrageous. And I know that as long as I can sort of take a breath, that I will still be there to back anybody that needs help, because it's terrible. If you were in a situation like me and had no support, because there is no way that you could do this on your own. You need somebody to have your back the whole time. And the people in authority in Ireland are not going to do it for you. Anything that you get, you're going to get off your own back in this country.
As the survivors of mother and baby institutions await the final report from the Commission of Inquiry into Mother and Baby Homes, Margaret says all anyone wants is the truth.
What's the big secret? Everybody knows about Tuam. Everybody knows about Sean Ross Abbey. Like, what is the big secret? Let's just do this and make it right for people. It isn't good enough for them to say that there's babies buried in Tuam in a septic tank. Like, they need to put this right for those mothers. How many mothers are out there living off antidepressants, living off their nerves because they don't know where their children are? It isn't good enough. And the government need to step up now. And I, for one, am going to keep at my local representatives here till I see them making a God honest stand for the people who elected them in. And I won't stop. And they know that.